Good evening, and welcome to Learning to be Resilient in the World of MS. This webinar and telelearning series is brought to you by CanDo Multiple Sclerosis, the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, the Multiple Sclerosis Society of Canada, and Eadie. My name is Laura Coyne, and I'm the Programs Manager for CanDo MS. I will be your moderator for this evening. CanDo MS transforms lives. We deliver educational programs on exercise, nutrition, and symptom management to inspire and motivate long-lasting change for those with MS and their families to help them thrive. Please visit the CanDo MS website, mscando.org, to learn more about CanDo MS's online and nationwide in-person programs. CanDo MS is excited to partner with the National MS Society to bring you 15 webinars in 2017. The mission of the National MS Society is to help people affected by MS live their best lives as they stop MS in its tracks, restore what has been lost, and end MS forever. You can explore other society programs, services, resources, and connection opportunities at nationalmssociety.org. Our speakers this evening are Barbara B. Applebaum and Dawn M. Eadie. Barbara Applebaum is a motivational speaker and published author. She is living with MS. Barbara inspires people to embrace life, a life of wellness. Her motto is, never again say, I should take better care of myself. Dawn Eadie is a professor of rehabilitation medicine and a clinical psychologist with the University of Washington. She is affiliated with the University of Washington Healthy Aging Rehabilitation Research and Training Center. Welcome, Dawn Eadie.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here this evening and talking with you about resilience. It's a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So let me tell you a little bit about how I got started in this topic, because I think it really sets the stage for what we'll be discussing tonight. I am a scientist and psychologist at the University of Washington and have done research and worked with people with MS for, over 20 years now here in the Pacific Northwest. And when I started out in my career, I started doing research that really focused on what was wrong with people living with MS, meaning what things went wrong for them. So I did studies on depression. I did a lot of research, and I continue to do research on depression and chronic pain. And I was interested in what can we learn about depression and chronic pain, to help people deal with those conditions. But what I quickly caught on to as I was starting to work more and more with people with MS and do research is that even though those are things that people with MS often experience among many other challenges, the vast majority of people who have MS that I encountered, both in my clinical care as a psychologist as well as my research and just the friends that I developed and partners I developed in research over the years, I really discovered that most people are quite resilient despite living with a chronic neurodegenerative disease. And it got me curious, why do so many people deal with this very challenging disease and still not only cope with it, but actually, live well with it, thrive with it. So I became interested in this topic of resilience, which really has to do with that ability or capacity to maintain or regain well-being and maintain or regain progress towards goals, whether they be personal goals or towards things that you value in the face of a chronic stress or chronic condition such as MS. So our research group here at the University of Washington has increasingly been trying to study not only what goes wrong when people have MS, but what makes them strong. So as you see on this slide, this is the definition, a scientific definition that we came up with after talking to many, many people living with MS and other chronic neurologic conditions. And so resilience, if you define it in a kind of clinical capacity, it has to do with, again, the capacity to maintain or regain well-being and maintain or regain progress towards valued goals in the face of adversity or chronic stress. So really it has to do with that ability to kind of roll with the punches that can come with a chronic condition like MS. It has to do with bouncing back, not just from the daily hassles that can come from MS, but also some of the bigger changes that sometimes MS necessitates. So that's what resilience is about, and I'm going to talk with you for a few minutes a little bit more about what resilience is and start to lay the stage for what you can do to become more resilient, and then we'll turn it over to Barbara from there. So next slide, please. And before I say too much else, I do want to point out that resilient people still experience the very normal and understandable emotions at times of things like discouragement, anxiety, grief, sadness, anger, frustration, stress. I mean, to be human is to experience these kinds of feelings at times. They're all normal, understandable emotions, especially when one's faced with challenges. The difference is that when people are resilient, they don't become these emotions. They recognize them, they see them as part of their experience, but they move past them, and they sometimes even use them to help them motivate or engender what they need, the kind of strength to address whatever challenge they're faced with. So, you know, if you're feeling at times frustrated or sad or discouraged, or even suffering from something like depression, that does not mean that you are not resilient. You can still be resilient in spite of those very common, understandable feelings. Next slide, please. So what is resilience? Again, I've described it to you, but one thing I really like to point out is that it is the norm, not the exception. So if you're resilient, not just special people are resilient, but really resilience is something that resides in all of us, and is something that that lies not only within us, but within our communities and the people around us. So you all have the capacity to be resilient, to grow from the challenges that come with MS, to live well, and even to thrive in the face of MS. And we'll talk about how to do that in a few moments. Next slide, please. So what is resilience when you think about it from a perspective of optimism? Many of you have probably heard the term somebody's an optimist or not an optimist, someone who we tend to think of optimists as people who always look on the bright side of things. And to some extent that's true, but really resilience is a lot more than just always having a positive attitude. It really entails having what I like to call realistic optimism. And what do I mean by that? Well, realistic optimism involves maintaining hope while moving forward and dealing with one's current reality. So it's quite different from denial. When you are resilient, you are not in denial of the many challenges that can come from MS, or just the challenges from everyday life in today's society. So resilience is not denial, and it does not mean a Pollyanna type of optimism where you ignore challenges. Rather, it has to do with how you have flexibility and persevere in the face of challenge, and it really requires both courage and hope. So resilience, again, entails realistic optimism. It allows you to be capable of realistically recognizing some of the challenges that come with living with MS, and yet come up with ways to manage those challenges, to be hopeful that you can live a life that you want to live. Next slide, please. So with some of the research we've done at the University of Washington, we have really worked with people living with MS to learn from them, as well as family members and care partners and friends of people with MS, and really tried to find out what does resilience look like in people living with MS. Resilience has been studied in a lot of different groups, but we were curious, what does resilience look like in people with MS? And so a former postdoctoral fellow by the name of Ariel Silverman and our team did a study where we did a number of focus groups and interviewed a number of people living with MS from all walks of life, and asked them what it meant to be resilient to them and how they saw resilience. And on this slide, what you see are just some of their quotes about what resilience meant to them. So it meant things like, I just don't want to survive, I want to thrive. again, that idea that one can have a good life and not just get by. Another person said it's having the attitude to live the best life possible. Another one, which I particularly liked, is this person said, it's not dwelling on what I can't do, it's relishing what I can do. And another described it as buoyancy, that ability to bounce back. These and other quotes really helped us, and other information we got from learning or from talking with people with MS really helped us understand that resilience is something that is not just a state, but it's something that people often actively have to work at, have to really practice. Next slide. On this slide, you see a picture and a quote from Chuck Curry, who was diagnosed with MS in 2003. And Chuck says that in his eyes, resilience is like a muscle, and that you become more resilient by having the muscle exercised, by having challenges in your life. And resilience has characteristics of both strength and flexibility. And I think his quote really speaks to what we're aiming to do this evening, which is to talk a bit about having that strength and flexibility and some strategies for gaining that, or if you have that, as many of you likely do, how to deploy that in your life. Next slide, please. So it is true that, and many studies have shown this, both within people with MS as well as other groups of people, that people do vary in how resilient they are. Some of us are more or less resilient than others. And research has shown us a bit about why that is. And some of what we have learned is that resilience is not something that you just have or don't have, but rather it really has to do with how you view and respond to challenges. And it's not simply about the number of challenges or stressful events you experience. So certainly you will meet people who've had many stressful things in their lives and many challenges who are quite resilient. And conversely, you can meet people who struggle to be resilient despite maybe having fewer challenges. And a lot of it comes down to how we view challenge. So if you view adversity or challenges as a threat, you're more likely to be less resilient. If you view challenges or adversity as a challenge, you tend to be more resilient. So those people who see a challenge such as the changes that can come or symptoms that come with MS as a problem to solve or to work around, they tend to be more resilient and to be able to manage those symptoms or challenges and get past them or learn to live and work around them and still live the life they want to live. If a person sees a challenge as a threat, or not as a challenge, but they see adversity as a threat and tend to respond to that by avoiding that threat, focusing on all the negative aspects of that threat, or retreating from that threat, they're going to be less resilient and probably not do as well. So you might be wondering, how resilient am I, or how do I know how resilient I am? I mean, some of us are more naturally resilient. The science has even looked at, how resilient people are and how much of it is due to genetics and other things. And we know that we all have a certain level or set point of resilience, whereby about 50% has to do with our genetics, so it's in our biology, as well as early life and as well as adulthood experiences that affect how resilient we are. But the good news is that if 50% is kind of set by those early experiences in biology, another 50% of our resilience is really the part that can be learned and practiced and has more to do with how you respond to challenges. So about 50% is quite a bit of control over your resilience. So I would say that resilience really is a work in progress, as one woman with MS said to us, and it's something you can work on. So even if you don't feel particularly resilient, research and just my experience in talking with many resilient people with MS is that you can learn many ways to be more resilient. So what are some of those building blocks? I'm going to provide you with just a bit of an overview of what some of the resilience building blocks are, those things that set a stage or help build a foundation of resilience. And then I'm going to turn it over to Barbara in a few minutes to get into more detail about how to build resilience. What you see on this slide is what the research tells us about resilient people. There's certainly many other ways people are resilient, but in general, resilient people tend to have a few of these things in common. They don't necessarily have all of them, but they have some of them. So they tend to have supportive relationships. Those relationships may be a spouse or a partner. It may be other family members, and it may be people outside their family, but they tend to have people who they feel well supported and who they feel that they also reciprocate in providing support to. People who are resilient tend to have good problem-solving abilities, that ability to kind of see, okay, what's going on here and what are my different options for doing something about it, and then try out those options. They tend to have good communication skills, the ability to express what they need, to listen to others, and to communicate and navigate challenging communication, whether that be with healthcare providers, family members, or others. Interestingly, people with resilience, as I mentioned earlier, still have what we might call negative emotions. So they still experience things like sadness or loss or frustration at times. What differs between people who are resilient and people who struggle with resilience is how they manage those negative emotions. So they're able to cope with them, to maybe recognize them, but not become them, and not let those negative emotions really color or dominate their experience. And also, interestingly, they're able to savor positive ones. So when they have a moment of satisfaction, whether it even be just listening to a silly joke or some small thing that helps them feel positive, they're able to really savor or enjoy those positive emotions. People who are resilient tend to have self-efficacy, and by that I mean they believe that they can manage or cope with challenges. And certainly coping and managing challenges helps you build your self-efficacy. So that's an important piece. Another resilience building block is having that ability to manage symptoms, or what we sometimes call self-management skills. Knowing and having some tools in their toolbox to deal with things like fatigue or pain or low mood. People who are resilient also tend to live mindfully and intentionally. That is, they tend to be very aware of and in the present moment, and to make decisions about how they live based on intentions versus just reacting to things. And finally, another important resilience building block is that people who are resilient use existing strengths. All of you have some difficult things in your life besides MS that you've dealt with in addition to MS, and you've gotten through those. And all of us and all of you have strengths that you can identify and build upon to help you manage the challenges that will come in the future. And so people who are better able to recognize what they're good at and not so good at, and really focus on using their strengths or what they're good at to work around challenges, tend to be more resilient. So again, those are just the main building blocks. There's many others. You're going to hear about a few more in a few minutes. And I like to point out again, if you don't have to have all of these to be resilient. What I learn is that some people have a bit more, like some people might be better problem solvers or good communicators. Others are just really good at really living in the moment and intentionally, or have really supportive relationships. So these just give you an overview of some of the areas you might start to think about where you could identify your strengths and start to work towards either nurturing your existing resilience or building it. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Barbara.
Thanks, Dawn. I appreciate it. And hello, everybody. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me. And my name is Barbara Applebaum. As it was introduced, I am a wellness coach and consultant who is also a motivational speaker and an author. And I happen to be a person who's been living with MS now for 11 years. And to be truthful, it's been a journey, and I'm sure many of you can relate that it's not always easy. It's different in each of us, and every day can be a different adventure because we just don't know what may or may not happen. So to recognize that you have resilience helps you to get through all of this. And something somebody said that I felt was very wise with regard to resilience is you don't know how strong you are until you're tested. And those of you living with MS, believe me, I get it, you're being tested. And, you know, I think that we're all stronger than we realize, and I think that as we go through tonight, you'll feel even more empowered by the time this webinar is complete. So looking at this slide here, it's how do you discover your resilience? That's really the key, right? Because we might think we're resilient, but how do we know we're resilient? And there was a famous mythologist by the name of Joseph Campbell who wrote a story called The Hero's Journey. In The Hero's Journey, you're in the ordinary world. It's the status quo, normal life, nothing exciting is going on. You're going about your business, most likely living on autopilot, which we're all very good at in this busy, stressful, crazy world that we live in. And then in the hero's journey, there's a call to an adventure. But what I like to say, it's a slap in the face, virtually, by the universe that pulls the rug out from under you, swoosh you off your feet, you're laying flat on your back, the air has been knocked out of your lungs, you're gasping for breath, and you're staring up at the sky, and you're going, oh my God, why me? And that could have been your diagnosis, or it could have been some other trauma or crisis that occurred in your life. Following this, you're thrust into this unknown world unexpectedly, and you're going to face challenges, and it's not going to be easy until help arrives. And that help can be in the form of yourself helping you. It could be in the form of family and friends, a doctor, a team. We'll get into all of that later. But they help you navigate this world, and they take this unknown world and turn it into this extraordinary world. And through that, you discover your magic elixir. And what I like to say, even though Joseph Campbell just calls it a magic elixir, I interpret it as that is your resilience. And you discover this strength. And when you return to what was the ordinary world, you're in this new normal with this newfound magic elixir or your resilience. And then you are facing this no longer ordinary world, but now it's this exciting new adventure for you. And because you have this magic elixir, you have it to share with others too, to help them on their journey. So it's a little less challenging for them. So today, we're going to be our own hero. I like to call it, in spiritual terms, as 13th century Persian poet Rumi says, the wound is where the light enters you. Namely, through our wounds, through our challenges, through our trials and tribulations, we learn. We learn our strategies to build and deploy resilience. Next slide, please. So adversity, it's a word that we're tossing around here tonight. So what would we call adversity? Well, as I said, one of the biggest adversities in my life and in many of yours was that diagnosis of MS. I don't know if you remember how you felt at the moment that occurred, but when I walked into the doctor's office for that second opinion, I was so confident they were going to say it was something else and that they had made a mistake and I was fine and take a pill and you'll be fine, don't worry about it. And then all of a sudden, when I got beyond a shadow of a doubt, you have MS, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I was shocked, and not to say the least, I was stunned. And then, of course, I got angry and very upset because it's like, how could that happen? So that was a big challenge. Of course, there are other challenges you can face too, like limitations that come with your MS that perhaps you didn't have before. Like for some of you, maybe walking is a challenge and you used to love to walk everywhere. Or maybe you were a runner and now you can't run. It just depends on the type of situation you have. You may have also noticed a change of relationships. Sometimes when you go through a crisis or a trauma or a major event, you will notice that your relationships are going to change. Your family is always your family, so you really can't get rid of them. However, you will gravitate towards those who really get it and understand, and perhaps kind of shy away from those who just really don't. You also might find in your friendships, and we'll get into it in a minute, that you're going to lose some of your friends because maybe they weren't really your friends after all. Maybe they were just acquaintances. And the reason, which I'll get into now, is because you receive sympathy instead of empathy. And I don't know how many of you know the difference, because it is a very slim difference, but it's an important difference. Imagine you're in a box, and in this box you are sitting, and you have your MS. Your friends are on the outside. Those who want to show you sympathy are going to come up to you and say, hey, what's going on? And you're going to say, oh, I was just diagnosed with MS. I'm so upset. I just can't think straight. I don't know what I'm going to do. My whole life has changed. Help me. And the person is going to say, oh, you know, I had something like that happen too when I had X, and this is why I feel this way, and this is what happened to me. And they're going to jump in your box with you, and they're going to make it all about them. Instead, what you want is you want the friend or the family member who's going to offer you empathy. That person is going to approach the box, and when they say, hey, what's going on? And you go into your saga of what's going on and what's happened to you and how awful it is, they're going to say to you in response, wow, it's understandable how you feel. What can I do to help? And they're going to reach a helping hand, verbally or physically or both, and help you get out of that box. So they're going to keep it about you. Next slide, please. So questions you might be asking yourself at this point is, why me, right? I mean, why did the universe pick me, of all people? What did I do wrong? How could this have happened? And why now? Life's good. Why shoot me down now? And then my biggest question that I kept asking, and quite frankly, 11 years later, I still ask, are you sure? Because, you know, there's margin for error in everything, right? Could be margin for error in a diagnosis too. It's normal and natural and human to ask these questions. But what's not normal is to wallow in them. And when you have your resilience, you will find your way out of the darkness and into the light. Next slide, please. So naturally, as humans, we have what is called a fight or flight response. It's our survival mechanism in the brain. It's how we react to perceived threats. And Dawn talked about viewing adversity as a threat. Well, a real threat is, as you can see in the cartoon that I provided here, is if you're going to be a little fish that's going to be eaten by a really big fish. That's immediate danger. That's a real threat. You don't want to get eaten alive. No, thank you. And that survival mechanism controls your heart rate, your breathing, your blood pressure, which is basically your nervous system. And when it's triggered once in a while, that's okay. Because as I said before, it is your survival mechanism. But when you view adversity as a threat and you have adversity in your life, it's really more like anxiety. It's a stress response from your thinking, and you're repeatedly triggering this breathing and excessive breathing and blood pressure rate and heart rate so that your immune system gets overwhelmed and it gets stressed out. It gets compromised. And if you combine that with a less than healthy lifestyle, like making poor choices when it comes to nutrition and exercise and a spiritual practice, it creates a ripe environment for chronic illness to take hold. And what's really important to point out here is with resilience and with taking care of yourself, you can live well even with a chronic illness. Next slide, please. So stress. How many of you have said, gee, I'm so stressed today? And I bet all of you have said it at least once, if not a multitude of times, because we all do, especially if we're working, and we're working maybe at a job we don't like, or a job that has a lot of pressure on us, or we're always running late. Because of technology, we live in the land of we need it yesterday. We have instant gratification. We are moving so fast that we are in an environment that is ripe for anxiety and fear. And we're always, most likely always, in uncomfortable situations if we don't take control of it. And this can manifest as a quick temper, or being exhausted, or not being able to focus, or forgetting things. And stress is something that we need to take seriously because prolonged symptoms lead to serious illness. And prolonged symptoms also lead to your body's mechanism inside of increased inflammation, and inflammation leads to disease. And we don't want that. We want to minimize all of that. We want to minimize stress. We want to minimize disease. Next slide, please. So now, you've been thrust into the unknown on your own hero's journey. And you've got resilience in one direction. And guess what? You've got denial on the other. Because the old adage, when one door closes, another one opens. Yeah, well, sometimes you want to go back to that one that closed, and you want back in because it's what you know. It's what you're familiar with. It's what you think is good. And that's normal and natural. It is a normal human response. However, you can't go back. And if you continue to try to, that is called denial. And the key is you don't want to get trapped in the hallway in between, and you don't want to get trapped and stuck in trying to go backward. You want to focus on your resilience. You want to focus on moving forward toward that open door, going through that doorway. And I always like to say resilience is bending without breaking. Namely, you have that flexibility and ability to go through that door, to leave behind your denial, and take that chance, take that risk, because something fabulous is on the other side. And that's discovering your resilience and the life you can have with it. Next slide, please. So as you go through that door of resilience, you're going to have to take a leap of faith. And when I say faith, I don't necessarily mean you have to have faith in God, spirit, or energy. It's faith in yourself. Of course, it can be the other, but it depends on your beliefs, and I am not here to really discuss that. I'm here to talk about you. So I like to say you have to look at your Gales, your gremlin, which is that inner critic, that negative self-talk, that broken tape recorder in our minds that tells us we're not good enough. And our assumptions, interpretations, and limiting beliefs. As Dawn had alluded to, it's focusing on what you can do, not what you cannot do. And if you want to stop your negative self-talk, a real quick little suggestion is like when you're listening to the radio to a song you don't like, what do? You change the station. Do the same thing with the negative self-talk. If you catch yourself saying something really horrible to yourself, like if I'm looking in the mirror before I go out one night and thinking, oh my God, that outfit just doesn't do wonders for you and you look really yucky, change the negative self-talk and say, hey, it's the outfit, it's not you. Change your clothes and, oh wow, you look great. So change the station, change the messaging. Also, look within. Summon your courage. It's there. You might just not know it's there because you might not have looked before. But we all have it. We all have resilience inside us. And of course, when you want to take that leap of faith, the biggest question to ask yourself is, what's the worst that will happen? You know, sometimes we can build it up and feel that, you know, the world might come to an end, but it really won't. The worst that'll happen is you'll fall. And if you fall, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you continue on and you try again. And the more you try, the more you build your muscle of resilience. Next slide, please. I want to just touch upon the definition of wellness, because a lot of people see wellness and illness as similar, and they are not. Wellness is the balance of your mind, body, and spirit integrated all together. Nowhere in the definition by the National Wellness Institute is the word disease used. And they define wellness as it is an active process through which people become aware of and make choices towards a more successful existence. So, you're choosing to be successful with your resilience. It's not about being healthy or not being healthy. It's about being well, being strong, being resilient. Next slide, please. A great way to flex your resilience muscle is to stay in control. And you can do that by seeking help from a non-judgmental professional and or a family member. Remember the sympathy and empathy? You want someone who shows empathy toward you. You want to focus your energy to calm your emotions and keep your thoughts clear. Plan for the positive. I can. Someone once said to me that worry is planning for a negative future. So try not to worry. Try to stay present in the moment today. Of course, thinking about tomorrow, because we do have to plan, but don't worry. And release your fear. I'm sure you've all heard the common acronym of fear, false evidence appearing real. Just because it happened in the past does not mean it's going to happen in the future. Next slide, please. So keep in mind perception. This is one of my favorite sayings. We don't see things the way they are. We see them the way we are. Namely, you can shift your perception to the positive, and that's what we do when we are resilient. And I love this little kitty who sees himself as a lion, and I hope that each and every one of you, when you look in the mirror, you see that strong, powerful version of yourself. Next slide, please. And keeping a powerful mindset, this is in tribute to the fact that the Wonder Woman movie just came out, and the hero's journey and being your own hero. And she has her little bracelets of be strong, and I always like to say I may have MS, but MS does not have me. And I hope that a lot of you, if not all of you out there, can feel the same. Next slide, please. There are 4 phases of growing from adversity to being resilient. They are trauma, grief, acceptance, and thriving. And I like to correlate them to something that I learned as a child. Because as Dawn made the suggestion about, is resilience in our genes or is it something we learn? And I like to think that I come from a family of heroes, because I think my parents are heroes based on all the adversity they have withstood, between surgeries, diagnoses, loss of loved ones, raising 3 kids, struggling. You know, life is not easy, and there's a lot of adversity from the minor to the major. And they have always kept a positive attitude, and they have always been successful. So I like to say that my resilience comes from them, but it also comes from, next slide please, a game that they taught us when we were young, and it was called the panic game. My dad made it up, and it's something that we used to play sitting around the dinner table, and he would give these crazy far out situations, like you're caught upstairs with playing and watching TV, Mom and I are out, your brothers are with you, and smoke starts billowing up the stairwell, and you can't get out that way. What are you going to do? How are you going to get out of the house? And of course, we'd giggle and go, panic! And yet we couldn't panic, and the name of the the name of the game, in essence, was that we had to each come up with a scenario verbally of how we would get out of the situation without panicking. And so, in essence, my father was teaching us how to be strategic in our thinking. I came up with an acronym, so when you overcome adversity, you recognize the gift. And that 4-step strategic thinking process is get clear, increase your understanding, focus, take action, which also goes along with the hero's journey in the sense that you've been thrust into the unknown, so what do you have to do? You've got to get clear. You've got to increase your understanding of where you're at. You've got to focus on what's going on and how you're going to get out of there, and then taking action, you discover your magic elixir, and you get out of there and go back to your old world, but as your new normal. Next slide, please. So get clear. What do I mean by that? Well, as I said in the beginning, when I was first diagnosed, instead of asking, why me, I suggest shifting your mindset and asking, why not me? Maybe the universe picked you because it knew you were strong, and there were things you could teach others and help others, so that's why. Who knows? But why not you? Also, find ways to center yourself and look deep within, perhaps through meditation or prayer or mindfulness. Instead of being with a mind full, be mindful. It's also very normal to mourn the good health that you have lost, so take time out at this point to do so and acknowledge it. But as I said before, don't wallow there. And once you've done that, accept what's happening to you. Have faith in yourself and believe in yourself so that you can take that step or that leap forward. Next slide, please. Increase your understanding. This is a time to sort through the chaos, to gain the in-depth understanding of what is going on. Reach out to trusted family and friends. Ask questions of your doctor and nurses. Don't stop until you really understand. Do some research on the internet, but be careful to go to the right places. Don't just go to any willy-nilly website, because sometimes there's scary stuff out there and it's just simply not true. And try to be flexible as you adjust to your new normal. Remember, bending and not breaking, that's resilience. Next slide, please. And remember to focus. I like to say this is the time to put together your team of experts, where you're your co-captain along with your doctor. So like my team of experts, I started with my neurologist, and then I kind of expanded that to also include my internist. He and I are really my gatekeepers. So I include a nutritionist because I had to learn how to shift my eating to decrease my inflammation. I include a personal trainer because initially I had to learn how to exercise differently, because with MS I didn't want to overheat because that brought on a whole slew of symptoms, and I needed to still exercise and stay in shape, so I needed to learn a new way to exercise and other ways by which to exercise, because my old ways didn't necessarily work anymore with my limitations. Some people might need a physical therapist because they're a little bit more limited. Yoga classes, fabulous for your mind, body, and spirit. Creative art classes, work the other side of your brain if you don't do creative stuff. Brain health is critical, especially with an autoimmune disease. A healthy brain is a healthy body, and a healthy body is a healthy brain. So do whatever it is you need to do to be your healthiest self. Next slide, please. And then, of course, you take action, because this is when you're going to pull it all together and you're going to adjust to your new normal, and you're going to go back to what was your normal world, and you're going to cultivate all these new relationships that nurture you. You're going to find what you're passionate about, because you're going to be mindful and you're going to be present, and you're going to discover what you want to do with your good health, because I guarantee you, how often have you asked yourself, what do I want to do with my good health? And I challenge you to ask yourself that and come up with an answer sometime, and it doesn't have to be tonight. And then, of course, you're going to start to thrive in your new normal with your resilience. And I want to just make a note here that it's so important to remember that you're not responsible for what's happened to you as far as the trauma, the diagnosis, what have you. but you are responsible for how you respond to it. And if you choose to respond with resilience, you will live well, even with a chronic disease. Next slide, please. So I'd like to turn it back to Dawn to just summarize as we kind of bring a close to this.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. I just want to point out a couple other tools for nurturing resilience. I think several of them build on what she said. I think, again, it's really critical to think of yourself as someone who has superpowers or who has strengths. So really think about, over the coming days and weeks, you know, not what's wrong, but what's strong. So try to focus your attention to what you're good at. What are your strengths? What are the things you can still do? What are the things you like to do? And what has helped you get through adversity before in the face of challenges, whether they be related to MS or not? Another thing I like to point out is that so often when we're thinking about improving ourselves or coping with challenges, we focus on dealing with the challenges and doing lots of things that require us to really put out a lot of effort, when we sometimes forget that we also need to take time out or look for ways to cultivate positive emotions. So those kinds of emotions that might be things like, you know, happiness or joy, or simple things like a brief moment of laughter or contentment or connection. We know that those kinds of emotions are just as important, if not more important, than managing the challenging or stressful emotions. Why are positive emotions important? Well, first of all, they're not just byproducts or signals of healthy living, but they actually give us respite from negative emotions and from stress. They help us sustain coping efforts, and they really replenish us. So think about if you do something fun or you do something with others where you feel connected or invested and you feel good about that, that really gives you kind of replenishes your tank or replenishes your ability to manage the not so easy stuff. So don't put off living and doing things that bring you joy or happiness or satisfaction, but rather really strive to include those as part of your daily life. The science of positive emotions has taught us that it's important to have somewhere between 3 to 1 or 5 to 1 positive emotions for every negative emotion. So, you know, look for ways to just have brief moments of happiness or joy in your life, even if it's something as simple as enjoying the beauty of a sunrise, or reading something for fun, or connecting with someone. All those kinds of things, however small, are part of what help you be resilient. Also, we've talked a bit about living intentionally and living mindfully, and you're probably aware of the many different kinds of mindfulness meditation or mindfulness practices out there, but that's another tool for nurturing resilience that's out there, and I'm happy to take more questions about that later if it's helpful. And then I think finally another tool that we've described, but I want to really highlight, is this idea that you need to build connections, to build connections with others. And if you are lacking people who support you and are empathize and help you nurture your resilience, then look for people who do provide that for you and who you can provide it for them. It's mutual. We all gain from not only receiving support, but giving support. So look for ways to build connections. Maybe it's doing something simple like volunteering once a month by making phone calls to people who need a phone call about something, or look for other ways to build connections with others. Next slide, please. So in summary, people with MS are resilient and are very capable of thriving. And hopefully you've learned from our presentations thus far that there are many paths to building resilience, and that resilience, like a muscle, is something that can be strengthened and nurtured. So it's something that we've suggested some tools, and we'll be giving you more resources for building that muscle. You are not responsible for having MS, but you are responsible for how you live with it. And again, there are many resources out there for you to support you in this endeavor. And finally, you're not alone. Part of why we do this is to really bring people together and bring resources together to help you feel not so alone in your quest to live a good life. Next slide, please. So just a few additional resources. One that I want to mention is our Healthy Aging and Physical Disability Center. You see the URL at the top of the screen. We've put together a fact sheet on how to bounce back or how to age well with a disability. This is a rehabilitation research and training center where we're focused on studying and educating people about how people can age well or age healthy despite having a chronic neurologic condition or a physical disability like multiple sclerosis. And we are funded to do research and to spread the word about different strategies. So if you want to learn more about our work, and there's a number of resources on our website, you can look to this website. I'm going to turn it over to Barbara now for her resources.
Thank you, Dawn. Yeah, my resource is on my webpage, which you'll see here. The URL is applebaumwellness.com. Be sure to spell Applebaum correctly. It is A-P-P-E-L-B-A-U-M. And if you see the box at the bottom where it says Get Your Free Wellness Report, if you put your name and email in there, you will not only receive a free wellness report, but you will be added to my mailing list, and you will get a complimentary newsletter once a month that will be just a short article of whatever my random thoughts are for the month as far as living well and healthy in an integrative lifestyle, as well as where I might be speaking and other things that are going on. And then there'll be ways to connect with me also on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. And I do welcome you to connect with me. I would love to start a conversation if you have questions. I'm always looking for ideas for articles, so please reach out. I would love to hear from you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Laura, who is going to moderate our questions and comments for the rest of the evening.
Terrific. Thank you both so much. You know, before we get into the Q&A portion, what I'd like to do is ask a question again that we asked in the beginning. And the question is simple. Do you consider yourself resilient? And let's see what our response might be now versus the beginning of the webinar. And interestingly enough, we currently have 88% that consider themselves resilient versus 68% at the beginning of the webinar. So that's really good news to hear. Did you want to comment on that, Barbara or Dawn?
I just think it's wonderful because, as I said before in the presentation, and Dawn alluded to as well, is that you have resilience and you know it. You just might not have recognized it. So I'm really honored and excited that we helped you to discover your own resilience tonight.
Terrific.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm sorry, I cut you off there, Dawn. Did you want to add something?
No, I just was saying I agree. I think it's something that's within all of you.
Absolutely. And with that, what I'd like to do is address some of the questions that were submitted. And the first question I have, and I'm going to throw this to Barbara, is Barbara, what do you do when your superhero resilience cape flies off and catches fire?
First, it's yikes and grab a fire extinguisher. Don't want to get burned. You know, it's a fun question, but it's a true question in many regards because, you know, we think we want to be superheroes. We want to feel empowered. We do feel that way. But then, yeah, what happens when our cape flies off? What if it catches fire? Does that mean we've lost our superpower? And the answer is no, because as we've just stated, the resilience is inside of you. The cape is just a fashion statement to make you feel like you're part of the superhero, you know, Marvel comic book Justice League. You don't need a cape to be a superhero, to be your own hero. The cape is optional.
Dawn, did you want to add anything?
You know, that was well said. I think sometimes we have a tendency to put people who we view as resilient on a pedestal, and I think sometimes the media does that. There's many stories of people who have some challenges or disabling condition, and we see them and we kind of put them on this pedestal as if this is special and unique and rare, and really that is really not the case. Not only in our own experiences meeting people or having MS, but also just the science suggests that most people are much more capable of being resilient than society gives them credit for.
Dawn, I want to continue with you. And here's just a question about life. When something I have scheduled changes beyond my control, I get thrown off center, and I get upset, and I cry, and I'm overwhelmed. It's so frustrating. What should I do? How do I stay resilient?
I think the first step is just not beating oneself up for feeling that way. I mean, we all have days or moments where we're feeling overwhelmed, and maybe then on top of it, you pile on about the fact you're not maybe engaging in the resilience strategies that you have. I think the first step is just to show yourself some self-compassion, to say, okay, I'm doing the best I can, to take a deep breath, maybe do something that's self-nurturing or self-soothing, and then to think about kind of, okay, what are my goals here? What am I trying to accomplish? And what's one small step I can do in that direction? So that's what I would recommend. And I think a lot of the strategies that Barbara recommended would also fit nicely with that.
Did you want to add anything, Barbara?
I would say agree with Dawn for sure on all of that. And most importantly is don't beat yourself up for sure, and take a breath. Take a moment and really just pause. And don't get overwhelmed or lost in the moment. And even take something as simple as a pen and paper out and start making a list or jotting down just bullet points of what needs to be done or what you want to get accomplished or what you are thinking, and just a way to organize things a little bit so that you have some sense of control.
Great. Barbara, can you review empathy one more time? One of our participants noted that excuse me, people tell them that they know how they're feeling. I know how you're feeling. And is that empathy or is that sympathy, or where does that fit in?
Well, most people just say, I know what you're thinking or I know what you're feeling, because that's human nature. And it doesn't necessarily fit into either empathy or sympathy. It's just what they say. Because even myself, sometimes I naturally find myself saying that, and then I stop myself because it's like, you know what, I don't know what they're thinking or feeling. It's if they continue down the path of thinking they know how you feel, and then they turn around and say, I feel this too, and it's about me, and all about me, not you, and you get lost in it, that is sympathy. Empathy would be if they say, I know how you feel, they really don't, but again, it's a human kind of knee-jerk response that people say. But if they continue down with, what can I do to help? Or that must be awful. Or, you know, is there something that you need from me? That's empathy. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Did you want to add anything, Dawn?
Sometimes it's helpful to also think that people are trying to connect. They're trying to be helpful. I mean, some people really it is about them, but usually it's going to help you the most if you think, okay, they're trying awkwardly as it may be to be supportive, to be helpful, and to get past it, because they don't understand what you're going through, just as you don't understand what they're going through, whatever their challenges in life may be. And so, but focusing on that isn't going to be helpful to you or them. So that's what I would suggest.
And I'm going to jump back in on that one because that's a really valid point. And what I'd like to tell our listeners is that if they don't get it, but they want to, and you sense they want to, tell them, teach them, show them. Like with my family, when I was first diagnosed, some of them just really thought, well, you look okay, so you must still be okay. Namely, the old adage, you look fine, you must be fine. And I wasn't, only my symptoms weren't visible to the naked eye. So I had to say, you know, if someone said, how are you feeling today, instead of just fine, I would gauge who's asking. And if it was someone who I wanted to understand how I felt, I said, you know what, I'm not doing so fine today. And I didn't exaggerate, and I didn't go on, but I was honest. And I told them how it was and how it felt and how my life was being affected, so that then they could help me get through it, even if it was just for someone to lean on or if I needed them to actually do something to help me. So no one's going to know what's going on inside your body if you don't tell them. So share with them.
Terrific. Can one of you remind us what living intentionally means?
Do you want to do that, Dawn, or you want me to?
Sure. I'll start and you can jump in, Barb.
Okay.
So often many of us live on autopilot, and I think Barb alluded to that. So what that has to do with is that we just kind of go through our day, we react, we do what we need to do, but we're not really thinking, okay, is this something I want to be doing? And certainly there's things in life we have to do whether we want to do them or not, but living intentionally has to do with really prioritizing what's important to you and trying to live your life from those priorities. It includes things like really trying to live in the present moment and trying to be aware of whether or not you are living within those priorities within that moment. So, certainly fatigue and energy are a couple things that can be challenging when people have MS. And so really looking, am I doing things because I think I should do them? Or am I doing things because I want to be doing them? Are they important to me? They're important to people that are important to me. Seeing things through that kind of lens of making conscious, intentional decisions is really what living intentionally is all about.
And I would add the component of being mindful to that, instead of being scattered and having your mind filled with all this nonsense of the chatter that we hear all day long, of being very present and just being mindful about certain things and being aware. I actually just read an article that seemed very appropriate because I read it this afternoon and it was great for tonight's phone call. I got it out of Mindful Magazine, and it's about Emeryville Police Department. They have implemented meditation and yoga classes at their department headquarters for all of their police officers, because they say that it has proven to help build their resilience and help them decrease their stress and help them decrease overreacting or their PTSD in the cases of extreme stress. So I thought that was really interesting, because here's a bunch of people who they don't have MS, they don't have a chronic illness, but they do face chronic extreme stress every day. And so they've used mindfulness, intentions, and meditation, etc., to build their resilience and conquer it.
Terrific. I've got a couple questions about people. They have their new normal, and they don't want to negatively impact their families and their coworkers. So what would you say to that statement about someone that doesn't want to provide, negatively impact the people that support them?
Barb, why don't you take that one first?
Okay. I don't believe it's negatively impacting them. As long as I said before, you stay honest in how you feel and what you need from them, they love you and want to support you and want to help you. And it's human nature to want to help others. And you can also help them and give back to them in other ways. so that you can, in essence, refill their energy and refill their levels. So it becomes a give and take situation where you're not just taking. And even the smallest things of showing gratitude, showing appreciation, things like that. I think shifting the mindset, because it's not a drag or a pull on other people. It's not that way at all. At least that's not how I see it.
Did you want to add anything, Dawn?
No, I think it's well said.
Terrific. Here's a question. What do you do when you tell someone that you're not feeling well, and they actually say to you to suck it up and tell you that you're fine? How do you handle a situation like that, or what would you suggest for a situation like that?
I'm going to let you handle that. I'm going to let you handle that, Barb, other than I'm going to say that resilience is not sucking it up.
No, it's not.
Right?
Oh, my God, no, it's not.
If it was only so easy.
Exactly. And you know what? Sucking it up is not easy.
No.
Oh, my
if
God.
It was,
and
we'd
I
all do it.
apologize for laughing. Because I just laugh because it's so personal to me. So,
what would you tell them, Barb?
I don't want to get anybody in trouble here, but let's just say I have faced something similar, okay? I'm not going to say who, what, or when, because I don't want to get in trouble, because it's family. And again, it goes back to just because I look fine does not mean I feel fine. And it again comes to educating. And if people don't understand, this is when, remember when I talked about how you're going to lose some friends and or you might distance yourself from some family? If people really don't get it and they don't choose to take the time to really listen to you, to understand when you reach out to try to explain, those are not people you want to have around you to help nurture you, because you need that nurturing. And in essence, you want to be able to turn around and nurture back to help them, which you can do when you have that sort of relationship with that person. But if you have a relationship with someone that drains you, yeah, that's just, there's no sucking it up. You just got to let that go.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing if every conversation you lead off is, I don't feel well today, I don't feel well today. But my guess is that in the vast majority, if not all times, that's not what you're doing. You're actually just being authentic and honest. And if people can't hear that and tell you to suck it up, I think you have to think seriously about that person. And certainly we can't choose everybody in our life. We can choose many people and how we spend time with them. But I think then at that point, Barb's advice is well heeded. And, to think, okay, I was honest, and to applaud yourself for being honest, instead of what a lot of people I know with MS do is they're not honest. They don't say how they're really feeling because they're worried about how people will perceive it or worried about what people will say. So sometimes they kind of, suck it up whether they feel like it or not. But I think ultimately it's in a more authentic and resilient relationship if you're able to be honest when you're having a bad day, just like you would want that person to have a bad day. Because the reality is they have bad days too. There may be different kinds of bad days, and they don't know what MS is if they don't have it, but they're still human. So
absolutely.
So we are running close on the time. So what I'd like to do is ask each of you if you could recommend a book on resilience, and perhaps provide some closing comments that you might want to share with the group. I'm going to start with Dawn.
A book. I think I would recommend as a short book the National MS Society and the MS Society of Canada put together a booklet which we have in our slides, which is called Resilience, Addressing the Challenges of MS. I think if you want just a quick read, this really distills down some of the most important points about being resilient. And I would add that I think being resilient is, again, it's about recognizing when your strengths and building on those, and recognizing that you're human too. You're going to have good days and not so good days, and not being hard on yourself when you have the days it's more of a struggle. But really, really focusing on striving to deploy your resilience and deploy your strengths as best you can.
Barb?
Turn over to Barb.
Well, that's good. That's a good one. I don't actually have a book specific to resilience other than I'm going to make a personal pitch to a book that I'm currently writing, which I hope will be out by the end of the year. So sign up for my newsletter and you'll get updates on that. But I will say I just read a really terrific book that it's not about someone with MS, it's about someone with terminal cancer, actually. And it really is about resilience, and it's about coming face to face with one's own inner strength and perception of the world, and living mindfully, living intensely or full of intention. And it, I believe it was up for the Books for a Better Life Award with the National MS Society. I don't know if it won or not, but I know it was in the category, and it's called When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi, Kalanithi. It's a New York Times bestseller. He did not finish the book. His wife and friend had to finish it for him because he passed away. But it is a memoir, in essence, that is the dying have a lot to teach us about how to live. And it's really a very inspirational story.
And I would add, I find that book very helpful too. And it's also, he was a surgeon, I think, or he was a surgeon, maybe a neurosurgeon.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for participating in tonight's webinar. One of our participants made a comment that says, thank you both for helping us realize the gift of resilience. And I think that sums up what I'm feeling and what I think you shared with the group. So thank you so much for imparting your knowledge and sharing your thoughts about resilience.
Thank you so much for having us.
You're welcome. As we conclude, I would like to inform you of some resources available from CanDo MS. We do have our monthly e-news, as well as our Ask the CanDo team, which you can submit questions right on our website. We have a library full of articles, and as I mentioned, you can find on our website, and you were able to download tonight, an article written by Dawn and Barbara on the topic of resilience. And so those resources are available on our website, which is mscando.org. And again, the National MS Society also provides a wealth of resources. One, again, that Dawn had mentioned was Resilience, Addressing the Challenges of MS. So you can find that on their website. And again, that website is nationalmssociety.org. The next presentation in our webinar and telelearning series is Managing Complex Care Needs Wherever They Occur. It is on Tuesday, August 8th at the same time. So as always, you can register for the webinars free of charge. I would ask you to complete the survey that does appear on your screen as soon as we close the webinar. And finally, if you do wish to text to donate to support our webinars, you can do that by texting 970-626-6232. And most of all, I want to thank everyone out there for participating in tonight's webinar and wish you a good evening.